So I personally think the state of female characters currently in video games is kind of weird. Like, they're not terrible. At least I don't think that they're as terrible as some people are making them out to be. But I also do think that there's a lot that they can improve on when it comes to female characters, specifically in how they're written. Have you ever felt like a lot of female characters nowadays in video games and media in general are either super strong, super hot, or super unavailable and aren't really allowed to be human? At least that's the consensus I've personally been seeing. It's almost like the writers and developers of some games are kind of scared of writing women. Like, they're scared if they do something bold, they would get a lot of backlash. And I think that might have cornered the developers into thinking that they need to write female characters a certain way. But before that, if you're new here, hi, I'm Otsu, and I really like to rant about writing in video games and media, and I have some opinions about the state of women in modern video games. I think a big common belief is that some women in video games or in media in general are over-sexualized, or some are just too perfect, or they are unfeeling stoic leaders. There are also the female characters who are reduced to sidekicks, or they're only there to be an accessory. Hence why there's just been this accusation that women are underrepresented or represented poorly in video games. Now, where do I personally stand on this? I personally, again, agree that some of that is true, but I don't think it's fair to say that's all there is when talking about female characters in video games. I'm not saying the state of men in video games is automatically better. It's probably not. I'm discussing the women today because that's where most of the debate is, at least from what I've been seeing personally, just based on my experience on the internet. And I just have a lot of thoughts about the subject and I want to add to the discussion because why not? And I also happen to be a woman who enjoys video games quite a lot. Disclaimer, this is mostly my opinion based on my personal experience and you are free to disagree with them, and this is in no way a professional video essay. It's mostly just me yapping because I feel like it. So if you're not down with that, you can click out of the video. Also, spoilers for the following games listed on the screen. How far have we evolved in recent years and how much is that actually meaningful in terms of writing a character? Are they more complex, deeper, narratively meaningful, or are they just the same old tropes just with a girl boss label strapped onto them? Have we overcorrected in our mission for more representation of female characters? I also won't be talking about design that much. Like, I'm gonna mention character design a bit, but that's not really why I'm here. I'm here to talk mostly about writing, story, character, and narrative, and just the overall state of female characters in recent years. I want to tackle this point first because it's actually unique to me because I'm personally someone who enjoys a story-driven game, and even more so if that game's narrative is heavily character-driven. I love RPGs, JRPGs, I also like visual novels, but if you've seen my channel, you'd know that I also really enjoy Genshin Impact. Now, another disclaimer, when it comes to gacha, I mostly play Genshin, like that's the only gacha game I'm into. I've played it consistently for 5 years, I still enjoy it, and while I have dabbled in other gacha games, it just didn't really stick with me, mostly because I don't have the bandwidth or time to really play multiple live service games at once. So in this video, for the sake of simplicity, I'm also just gonna be mostly referring to Genshin when I refer to female characters in gacha. But if you have your inputs about other gacha, you can comment them down below. So let's start with that. I know that gacha games and anime and just a lot of Eastern media haven't always been the best when it comes to its portrayal of women. I get that certain exaggerations sell, and it's mostly just knowing your audience. Gacha games usually rely heavily on visuals to sell their characters or units, so I can understand why they would want to exaggerate features that their audience might find appealing. I'm not gonna fault a gacha game for having attractive female characters because that would be kinda unrealistic. Their design, for example, which sometimes means skimpy clothing, is supposed to be their selling point. A personality of that character is sometimes just an added bonus. And if you're really lucky, you would get a character that actually adds narrative value. But sometimes an attractive design is all you really need. Maybe you're not interested in story or characters, but you just want a pretty fictional person to look at. But does this mean there's no worth in even trying to look for narrative value in gacha game characters? I personally don't think so. Now, at least in Genshin, I don't think this is the case. I feel like we have both female characters that are intentionally made to appeal by just their design and physical attributes alone, but we also have characters that add a lot to the story and have a lot of stronger personalities. I think Navia, Dihya, A, and Furina are my personal favorites when it comes to more established female characters. They're all major characters in their respective regions' Archon quest, and they all have their own personalities, their own goals, and their own struggles and growth. They all have very appealing designs, but they also feel like human beings. beings and are like believable people. And a major contributing factor to this is how they were presented in the game. Navia, Dihya, and Farina were all treated as real people within the universe of Genshin before they were treated as characters of a video game that Hoyo wanted to sell. They were allowed to show emotions, to be unlikable, and for them to have personal motivations that's not necessarily related to the Traveler. The Traveler's role in their quest and story are also pretty minimal. Like, the friendship that the Traveler forms feels pretty believable and natural. The Traveler doesn't overstep and become this incredibly important person overnight. They had to earn these girls' trust before they called them a friend or a partner in crime. Now, A, or the Raiden Shogun, is a bit more interesting. She is actually in the beginning is probably like a good example of a character that makes some people believe that gacha characters don't really have depth, but then they added these personal story quests of her and she just becomes a great character and she has so much depth now. I actually believe she's one of the most complex characters in the game, like in present day. Patch 2.0a and patch 5 point something a is just very different. But anyway, in the beginning she wasn't really presented this way. Like I said, the game did a very poor job in highlighting her complexity as a character. Now this is because of the Archon quest spacing being pretty bad, and a lot of A's motivations and opportunities for meaningful character development were replaced by exposition dumps. And the Inazuma Archon quest also portrayed her, or the Raiden Shogun, as the main villain for most of its story. And at the end, the Traveler manages to defeat her and she only began to warm up to the idea of changing her ideals and also realizing the harm that it's caused to the people of Inazuma at the end of the quest. So hence why a lot of people, including myself, felt like she was very shallow in the beginning, like she wasn't a really good character. They wanted to make her complex, but the execution was just done poorly. But then it got worse actually. What happened with her first story quest is probably the worst thing the game did to her. Like, after barely establishing her in the Archon quest, the game framed A's next interaction with the Traveler in a very bizarre way. During its release in 2021, I played her story quest right after the Archon quest and it just felt so strange strolling around the city right after the Shogun puppet tried to murder the Traveler for the last 3 acts of the quest. But anyway, it's the jump from complex villain to clueless grieving woman was executed pretty badly. It just made me feel like they tried to redeem A without really laying out the foundation of what makes her complex and for her to have the slightest bit of awareness or accountability of what she's done during the Vision Hunt decree. But there's a big but here. They managed to actually give A the nuance that she desperately needed in her second story quest. And it's only been uphill from there, I think. One of my favorite games is Persona 5. And while I do love this game, I think the female characters of Persona 5 are particularly interesting, especially with the way they're presented. I think the way they handle the female characters in this game is good. It's not perfect by any means, but I personally do like it. The girls in Persona 5 all feel unique and are different from one another. You might be able to say that some of them fit into certain tropes, but I think the game does a good enough job in establishing them as unique individuals with their own thoughts and struggles. There are quite a few female characters in this game, but today I'm gonna talk about Anne. Anne is the first female character to join the main ensemble. She's described as this extremely beautiful girl. She works as a model, so she's very pretty. She knows she's pretty too. She owns it, but she also doesn't own it in a sense that she's an obnoxious character or even exploits her beauty to get ahead. She's assertive and intelligent, and if anything, the game shows that her beauty comes with a cost. There's this great video by Solari talking about female objectification in media using Persona 5 as a case study. I'll link it below. It's an awesome video and you should definitely check it out. It's very detailed. In that video, Solari goes into detail about how the game essentially tries to tackle the issue of how a grown man is objectifying underage girls. If you've played Persona 5, this refers to Kamoshida, who is the volleyball coach of the high school of the main cast, and he's a certified creep, to put it mildly. To summarize what happens in the game, this guy, Kamoshida, tries to coerce Anne into inappropriate relations with him so that her best friend, Anne's best friend, doesn't get kicked out of the volleyball team. He also later on is implied to have as the same best friend, who as a result tried to end her own life after the incident. Thankfully, she survived. The game also also made a point that because of how Anne looks, there are rumors going around that she's willingly participating in an appropriate relationship with Kamoshida, even though she was blackmailed, and it's very obvious that the adult should be the one being held accountable because Anne's a high schooler. But because of the way she looks, people around her already have this preconceived notion of who she is. Kamoshida is also horrible to the students in general. He repeatedly beats the volleyball team members. Quick explanation for those of you who haven't played the game. In Persona 5 specifically, you can go into someone's palace to steal their heart, and this palace is supposed to be a representation of their true nature and their inner world. And this guy, if you've seen his palace, it actually gets worse. This palace represents how he views women, and as you can see from the grotesque imagery, he views women as objects. There are lots of body parts that resemble women, but none of them have faces attached to them, and the ones that do have faces, they're dehumanized into wearing inappropriate outfits and are also portrayed to worship him, even though their real-life counterparts are the opposite and wouldn't do anything close to that. The whole point of this first mission is to defeat Kamoshida and steal his heart, which in the game is the same as either killing him or forcing him to confess to his crimes. The game is blatantly telling you that having such degrading views on women and men, actually, because Kamoshida is also abusive towards his male students, is not okay. And this is also where Anne finally got justice for herself and also the other women Kamoshida has hurt. So that's a pretty great story with a great female character taking center stage, but then later on, the game treats Anne in a pretty strange way. It's kind of weird because the game established how Anne is a victim of objectification, but there are also a lot of moments where the cast treats her in the exact same way. It's portrayed through a lighthearted lens and is there mostly for a comedic moment between the cast. Comes across as weird to me considering the narrative that they used to introduce her into the game, mainly because of how Anne is visibly uncomfortable in those moments, and even when she got her persona outfit, she also looked uncomfortable. There are also other female characters with a spandex or leotard as their persona outfit, like Kasumi, but Kasumi's a gymnast, so it makes sense for her to be wearing a leotard, and that doesn't personally bother me. I think for me personally, moments where it becomes weird is when the female character shows that they're extremely uncomfortable about being ogled at, and other characters just continue to ogle at them, and the camera is also panning them in a very invasive manner. But if they know they're hot and they want others to worship the ground they walk on, then by all means, more power to them. I'm not saying the girls have to be super serious or even unattractive to be good characters. Quite the opposite, actually. I think female characters can be great characters if they're written with purpose, and I think that's why Anne's portrayal in Persona 5 is a bit bizarre for me. It will always feel like objectification if the story and the game treats the characters as an object rather than actually having written them with a purpose. When I say a purpose, the bare minimum that most character needs to meet is just to be a part of the story in some way. Like they need to add value, like narrative value, and it doesn't even have to be super significant. They don't have to steal the spotlight of the main character if that main character happens to be male. They can influence the story or the characters within the story, or they can be the person to trigger character growth. These are the things that will make characters feel less like objects. Now, another thing about JRPGs like the Persona games and Final Fantasy is that they have a ton of interesting and attractive female characters. There are iconic characters that have been known to be beautiful coming from the JRPG genre, such as Tifa and Aerith from the Final Fantasy games. The Persona girls alone are also unique and beautiful, and there's 2B from the game Nier Automata. She's an android, she's attractive, and don't get me wrong, people fawn over 2B and how she looks, but her looks aren't what made Nier Automata so memorable. 2B is the main character of Nier Automata. It's a game that's set in a post-apocalyptic world where humanity is basically gone from Earth because aliens invaded, and they've deployed these machines to roam the Earth, and from the human side there are androids. I'm aware I'm doing a terrible job of explaining Nier Automata to you guys. If you haven't played the game, go play it please, and if you have, please forgive me. So anyway, 2B is an android, so her main mission is to fight the machines, and the main moral argument of Nier Automata is how machines and androids are no different from humans. They look for purpose, they enjoy mundane things, they form communities, have emotions, and do everything that makes one a human. And another interesting thing about 2B, other than being attractive in design, she's also emotionless and always professional in doing her job, making it seem like she's the perfect soldier. But then as the game progresses, you learn more about her and the truth about her and her tragic story, and how she's definitely not the emotional stoic android type that we thought she was. And I think when people think of 2B and Nier Automata in general, that's what they remember. So she's both a good character and also an attractive character, which is why I personally believe that it's okay for a character to be attractive. I feel like in more recent years, there's been a growing trend where a lot of characters, both female and male, that's not really allowed to be attractive. Like some devs are kind of scared to make a character too hot, probably fearing that they would be hit with the over sexualizing and objectification allegations, or just being called out for portraying unrealistic beauty standards, even though it's a video game. But I personally find that kind of dumb. I don't know if you guys also feel this way, but I personally feel like seeing attractive characters in video games, and this applies for both female and male characters, to be a good thing. Like, I just like seeing attractive characters personally. There's also this argument that we should have believable looking characters in video games. Representation matters, and if we just keep pushing out unrealistic proportion, that can be pretty damaging. And I actually agree with this to an extent. I personally find it funny when a character's proportions or their armor design is so outlandish, and I appreciate when we see normal looking women in video games. However, I do think a lot of games, not all, have overcorrected a little bit. I think it's just a fact that humans in general like to look at attractive people. We just gravitate towards them like it's in our biology. So I'm not exactly surprised to see that a lot of people, including myself, gravitate towards attractive characters regardless of their gender. It's why so many players of The Sims or any other game that has character customization spend hours making their characters look pretty, and why people use mods or custom content. We just like pretty things. But the question becomes, how do we make attractive characters without pushing for harmful stereotypes? Male characters also have unrealistic bodies in video games. I have yet to meet a coworker that has a body that's identical to Kratos from God of War. So I'm sure the average guy isn't expecting his wife to look like Lara Croft. So then why are the attractive or unrealistic male characters not scrutinized the same way the female characters are? Well, that's because the stereotypes of these male characters are usually associated with power, strength, or leadership, whilst the female characters have much more dehumanizing stereotypes, such as being treated as sexual objects or just there for eye candy. That's where the problem lies. So the starting point to fix that problem to me is just to make female characters attractive but also make them human, which does sound simple enough. I know it's a lot more complex than that. Making characters unattractive so that they feel more human is a false dichotomy. It's saying that in order to be perceived as strong, intelligent, and someone of high value, you would have to look a certain way, which isn't true because these things aren't mutually exclusive in real life. There are plenty of hot women and men who are also incredibly intelligent and kind, while there are also unattractive people who are complete assholes. The looks of the female characters can be appealing, but it's also not what would make them memorable. Sure, people remember Tifa for her noticeable proportions, but they also remember her for her character. If the unrealistic proportions and attractiveness of a character is all that it takes to make them iconic or memorable, then a lot of the gacha characters would dominate the gaming industry, but they don't. Even in the gacha sphere alone, or taking Genshin into account because that's the only gacha game I spend most of my time on, I latch on to both female and male characters because of how they're presented as characters. Their looks can shift my eyes towards them, but it's usually not the main thing that will make me feel attachment towards them. You know, it's always their story and what makes them human, their personality, their goals, and their struggles. So beauty isn't the enemy here. It's never been about a character being too attractive. It's about the lack of balance and a really dishonest portrayal of what a woman is. But I think games from smaller developers, or at least games that are interested in telling an actual story and filling their world with compelling characters, have handled female characters pretty well. I'm gonna be talking about Clair Obscur Expedition 33, mostly because I just completed this game not too long ago, and it's consumed my life a little bit. I won't spoil any major details about this game since it's pretty recent, and I do think if you haven't played it, please consider giving it a chance. It's made by like 30 developers, and it's taken the gaming sphere by storm a few months ago. The story of Clair Obscur Obscure is set in fantasy France, where each year a mysterious being known as the Paintress erases people from existence in an event called the Gommage. The Paintress updates a giant monolith with a decreasing number, and every person older than that number gets erased. So anyway, Clair Obscur has 3 main female characters. There's Mael, Lune, and Ciel. They're part of the expedition sent out to stop the Paintress, and these 3 characters are vastly different and memorable in their own way. I won't be focusing on Mael too much in this video. I just genuinely hope people aren't thirsting over her because she's 16. But the adult women, Lune and Ciel, are what I would consider to be strong female characters, and they're both very easy on the eyes. They both are capable of surviving in an unforgiving world that they live in. They have their strengths and they also have their weaknesses. And they were actually given enough screen time and development for the players to understand who they are. Lune is someone dedicated to the mission of defeating the Paintress. She has her own personal reasons on why she's so headstrong and is so dedicated even when things go horribly wrong during the mission. She's the one who's capable of making hard decisions when everyone else is lost or emotional. That even when things are going horribly wrong, she would just go, at least they're doing their job in making way for the next expedition that comes after. She sees the mission as more valuable than any individual lives, including her own. This has caused some clashes within the group, especially when things were dire. Lune in essence can be the baddie trope. She's the girl boss. She's fiery, pragmatic, and doesn't take from anyone. She's also kind of the leader of the group. Yet with Lune, I feel like I never found her to be overly arrogant. She's not demeaning towards anyone, including the male characters in the game. Gustave, who is another main character in the game, actually has a lot more emotional moments than Lune. And there's this particular moment in the game where Gustave was separated from someone he personally cares a lot about, and he's worried about her safety above all else. And he clashes a bit with Lune, who reminds him that personal affairs shouldn't distract them from their goal, which is the mission to defeat the Paintress. So when they see something suspicious, Lune is the one who's more cautious, while Gustave is the one who's more willing to risk their safety and the mission by default to find someone important to him. She's the more pragmatic one out of the two. She's not badass for the sake of looking badass. She does have a tragic backstory that's hard on her, but so does everyone else in the game. But she doesn't act like she's better than everyone there, or that her beliefs are superior and that her decisions are always right. She says things and does things because she wants the expedition to succeed. In her mind, she's doing what's best for humanity. This can lead her to be insensitive to other characters who might be different from her. We know this because Clair Obscur as a game is actually interested in making Lune a fully established character first than what her gender actually is. Her strengths and flaws make sense for someone who's had to live in an unforgiving world. It would make sense for anyone regardless of their gender actually, and that's because they made her human. Lune is also a character that could have been the girl boss trope. She's strong, a leader, and pragmatic, but the game doesn't let her be perfect because she's not. She's not always right, and throughout the game we actually see her showing weakness. And this shifts that perspective of her being the badass female lead of the game. She shows softness and kindness in many moments with different characters. She's hardened, but she's not heartless. She doesn't act like love and compassion is beneath her despite everything that she's been through. And she also has her own fears and her own insecurities underneath her strengths. The horrific things that happens throughout the game affects her. She doesn't always show it, but as I played through the game, it becomes increasingly obvious that she just shows it differently. The other adult female lead is Ciel. Ciel is also someone who's on the expedition. She has her own set of tragic backstories and traumas. She also grew up in the same circumstances as Lune and Gustave, but she's a bit different. She's softer and is often the more level-headed and empathetic one in the group. She can see and understand all sides of the arguments and is often the buffer when things escalate. She's kind and warm and more playful and approachable than Lune, but she's also someone who can hold her own just fine in fights or in life or death situations. She's not less or more than any character either, she's just different. Ciel is also someone who craves connection and love. The one thing I've noticed in modern portrayals of female characters is that they're usually not allowed to be in love or to desire the companion of the opposite sex. Like, being in love somehow makes them weaker, but I personally don't believe that. It's just human nature to want companionship, and I like that the game doesn't portray both CL and Lune's desire for companionship as a weakness. Slight spoilers for CL, but I also like how the game puts an emphasis on the root of CL's grief, and that is how she lost her partner. I think it's just a universal experience to feel the loss of a loved one, and I really like that they didn't portray this as a weakness. CL grieving over her late husband is portrayed as something human. Losing a romantic partner to death is part of the human experience, and having that love and that essence missing from certain characters is also something that I believe can dehumanize them a little bit, which is what makes them feel very off and stoic and not relatable at all. In some cases that works. Like, if you're trying to make a character that is just supposed to be so out of touch, so unrelatable, then that could work. But if you're trying to make a human character, that's a different story. I'm not saying that every character needs a love story or that every female character should fawn over some guy or a love interest, but when done right, it can add so much to them and what makes them believable as characters. I think it's nice to have two characters who are women and who are also different from one another, and yet none of them fit a common trope. They can exhibit traits that make them similar to certain tropes, but it's actually hard to put these characters under one label or under one box. And that's because they're written as humans first, with their own sets of experience and goals before they're anything else. The writer of the game isn't scared to write a character who's motivated by love and is attractive yet also headstrong in her goals. I love that, and I truly believe that this is what should be kept in the forefront when writing characters, regardless of gender and regardless of how attractive they are. Being attractive won't take away from the depth of these characters when they're written as humans first. If anything, for me personally, having attractive characters that look and feel human adds to the experience. I personally like to have my characters be attractive, like I said before. Like, if they're female characters in particular, I just usually prefer characters that I can aspire to be, like physical appearance wise. And not just that, of course, in other things too, like intelligence or wit. It's aspirational. There's also this question of, can female characters be messy? I genuinely hope so. I think messy characters are the most interesting and compelling because being messy usually leaves room for growth and unpredictability. When characters are messy, they're also usually very flawed. They contradict themselves and can come off as unlikable. But I also think whether or not a messy character is insufferable depends on how well they're built up or how the game presents them. I'm gonna use the game Last of Us 1 and 2 as examples, so spoilers for those games. So Ellie is pretty messy, especially in the second game. She does a lot of questionable things in that game, like especially after Joel's death. She throws away almost everything in her life and is pretty selfish, even to the extent that she's willing to hurt the ones she loved the most in order to achieve her goal, which is revenge. Now, the thing with Ellie, we've spent a lot of time with her in the first Last of Us game. We've seen her through Joel, who at the time when he first met Ellie had lost his own daughter at the start of the game. That and the addition of the unforgiving nature of the world of The Last of Us, Joel as a character is hardened. And then he met Ellie and they traveled together. She started to grow on him, and we as the players started to care for Ellie the same way Joel does. We've seen her through her ups and downs and how she grows as a character. So when she makes questionable decisions in the second game, people can still understand where she's coming from. Especially considering the main reason Ellie's even on a quest is because she wants to avenge Joel, who's been killed by Abby. Now, Abby is one of the most divisive characters I've ever seen in a video game, and I can understand why. She's the one who killed Joel in The Last of Us 2, and the game actually does try to establish why she did so. Quick recap and major spoilers for The Last of Us. So, as some of you may already know, The Last of Us is set in a post-apocalyptic world where fungus have essentially taken over the world by acting as parasites to the human brain and turning everyone into zombies. So the first game focuses on Joel, who, like I said, was a single dad, and then he lost his daughter, and then he meets Ellie, and Ellie is a girl who's immune to the fungus. They go on a journey to find a group called the Fireflies who might be able to make a cure by studying Ellie and also understanding what makes her immune. And as they travel together, like I said, Joel eventually goes to care for Ellie because she reminds him of his own daughter. And when they did finally reach the Fireflies, it turns out Ellie needs to die in order, like, for the process of finding the cure to even begin. Joel, who's pretty much fed up with the world that's taken everything from him, decided to save Ellie and give a middle finger to the rest of the world and killed the Fireflies doctors. He actually lied to Ellie about this decision and said that they'd failed to find a cure. This single decision by Joel is what kicked off the events that transpired in The Last of Us 2, which is where Abby took revenge on Joel for killing her father, who was, surprise surprise, one of the doctors in the Fireflies. Ellie, devastated and enraged by Joel's death, decided to enact revenge on Abby. I've always understood that what The Last of Us 2 is trying to tell the players is that revenge is a fool's game. It's a game that costs both Abby and Ellie everything by the end. Now let me tell you, when The Last of Us 2 first dropped, I saw so much hate for Abby, but people were a lot more lenient towards Ellie, even though they were both pretty messed up and made similar questionable decisions. I personally think the way the game set up the players to play as Abby right after she offed one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved character of the franchise, was the nail in the coffin. I think as a standalone character, Abby is pretty complex. She's written to be messy, yet the way they structured and incorporated her into the game wasn't the best. It wasn't ideal. I don't know, I feel like if this point of view switch was done much later into the game, or even if they introduced Abby and her backstory before the Joel thing happened, a lot more people would be more forgiving or at least empathetic towards her character. I don't think people hate Abby for being a messy female character because arguably both Ellie and Joel have done crueler things in their time, but people just weren't ready to accept the nuances that come with Abby as a character. And it's just a natural reaction from seeing one of the most beloved characters in the game die so brutally. It's like the game didn't try to build the emotional layers that's needed for a character that's as complex as Abby. I think Abby would be more beloved or appreciated as a character had the game made some changes on how they wanted to incorporate her into the story. So yes, female characters are absolutely allowed to be messy. I hope they get messier. Ellie as a character is messy as hell, and people think she's a good character despite how questionable she can be at times. She is still one of the most beloved video game characters in recent times, after all. I think this one point is more apparent in Western games than it is from like Eastern made games, but I think having femininity in female characters isn't a bad thing at all. It's not a sign of weakness or shallowness. It's just another trait that some humans have. Some women are more feminine and some are more masculine. It's a range, and erasing one end of that range is also what I think adds to the staleness in female characters that I personally feel in more recent years. As a woman myself and as someone who mostly grew up a tomboy, I still very much enjoy girly or feminine characters in video games. And when I say femininity, it's not just in the way that a character dresses or are presenting themselves. I also mean that I enjoy female characters who are gentle, nurturing, empathetic, and sensitive. These are traits that are commonly associated with femininity, and I don't like how it's also associated with weakness. These traits are something that a lot of people can relate to, so erasing these traits from female characters to make them stronger is what I think results in some of them feeling like they're stoic girl bosses. Women can be gentle and empathetic while also be badass and the best in what they do. It shouldn't be mutually exclusive. When I think of a feminine female character, personally I think of Princess Peach from Mario, and I think she's an enjoyable character. She's the damsel in distress, and in one of her spin-off DS games, the game's mechanic literally revolves around her emotions. And I've seen some people say that this is a harmful portrayal of an emotional woman, but I personally don't think so. We're all human, we all have emotions. Princess Peach just happens to be a princess who gets kidnapped pretty often and is an emotional person. Is she a complex and nuanced character? No, probably not, but that's also fine. I personally just enjoy her character for who she is, a damsel in distress that Mario's been rescuing since the 1980s. I also don't think that they need to make her suddenly badass. Just let her be badass in her own way. That's how we have variety in characters, and it will keep away the staleness that we we've been seeing. Even if Princess Peach doesn't fit what some people might see as a strong female character, doesn't mean that she should be erased. We can have other female characters that are more rough around the edges, but it doesn't have to be Princess Peach. I think we should just be making new characters instead of, reinventing old ones. All I'm saying is variety is good. I sometimes ask myself, like, so who are these characters for? Well, I don't know actually. I mean, the answer should be simple enough, right? Depending on the type of game you're playing, these characters are part of the product that they're trying to get us as the players to buy. If it's a gacha game, then I think prioritizing design over story is kind of expected, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all gacha characters are shallow, like we've already established earlier, and I'm sure many of you guys can come up with more examples with female characters from a gacha game that not only have appealing designs, but also depth and characterization. More and more people have come out that they actually prefer to play as attractive characters. I personally can attest to this. If I'm playing a video game, I usually would gravitate towards attractive characters, both female and male. Why? I don't know, human instincts, I guess. Do I appreciate it when female characters are attractive and also have believable proportions? Absolutely. But do I crave to see realistic looking characters in video games, like hyper realistic people? Personally, not really. What I look for are characters that have a good story to tell. Characters who have unique motivations, who are complex, and have compelling character arcs. Female characters being attractive will just be an added bonus for me. I can have that suspension of disbelief that characters don't have to look hyper realistic with real life humans to be engaging or to be believable or even to feel human. So if a character is designed to be more average looking, I usually wouldn't mind if they have a compelling enough story or good writing, because they would just be another character. But the bad character writing is usually what makes or breaks the character for me. So these strong female characters aren't really always for the players, and they're not for the writers. So then that would mean these characters are written for the sake of appeasement. I feel like a character that's written should be either for the writer because they want to tell a story, or they're for the players who will experience that story or will enjoy the character. And what I feel like has been happening in the past few years is the writing of female characters has been more focused on being palatable. Hence why I think some developers are scared to write like messy characters or like just make bold decisions when it comes to like female characters or bolder writing. It's like some developers and writers are scared that if they take a certain direction, it might be misinterpreted. But I also think that's just what happens when you try to please everyone and try to check every box and then trying to send a message without really spending time to tell the story of these characters. I do feel like this is more apparent in other mediums such as TV shows, movies than it is in video games. You can't have strong characters without establishing why they're strong. If we're going to have characters that are jaded, then show us, the players, why they're jaded. And I don't mean in a random exposition that gets shoot in. Video games are probably one of the most immersive mediums that we have at our disposal. Clear Obscure does a really good job with this, both for its male and female characters. You can kind of tell when a character is supposed to be a product than actually being a character. That's what happens also when they are only created with filling a checklist in mind. Like, why would anyone make an effort to write a character, their backstories, their ambitions, their dynamic with other characters, what makes them tick, yada yada yada, when you can just go, look at this girl, she's super strong, has a tragic backstory, and doesn't take shit from anyone, and makes absolutely no mistake because she's absolutely perfect. It's also just a lot harder to write a character that has depth and feels human when the goal is just to check certain boxes, you know? There's always that saying that's been begging developers and writers for like media in general, not just video games, to make good characters that are women instead of good women characters. The former's much more focused on the narrative and writing, while the latter focuses on catering to a group of people or a certain idea of how women should be portrayed. Now, in my opinion, this kind of writing is actually more apparent in TV shows and movies than they are in video games. But I'm just calling it out here because I don't want this kind of writing to translate to video games. I would much prefer the female characters in my video games to be as diverse and as interesting as they can be. Another question I would like to explore is there room for romance for female characters in video games? I hope so. I feel like in more recent years, female characters in media, like in general, aren't really allowed to crave crave romance. It's like wanting love is a show of weakness and a lack of independence. But I hope this will never become the case for video games. I'm personally someone who loves love, so I will always appreciate a good love story. Keyword, a good love story. I personally wouldn't enjoy a romance that's shoot in for the sake of fulfilling a fantasy, or if it just feels like it doesn't fit in the story, like it's just out of place. But I personally believe that a good romance can actually add so much depth to a character. Going back to Ellie, throughout The Last of Us 2, Ellie was with Dina, and you could tell that Ellie really did love Dina, and Dina tried her hardest to stay by Ellie's side even when she was losing herself. But in the end, Ellie was so consumed by grief and the need for revenge that it ended up costing her Dina, someone who's been by her side for the entirety of the game. So at the end of the game, like, Dina and Ellie had a pretty good life. They were living peacefully on a farm for like a year or so. That is until Ellie's informed of Abby's most recent location, and it's there that Ellie decided that she needed to finish the job. Now Dina, worried for Ellie's safety, begged her not to go, and Ellie initially agreed until that same night she had a dream about Joel being murdered, and in the morning Ellie decided to leave Dina in pursuit of Abby. Anyway, she changed her mind. When Ellie does come back later on, Dina and their son are nowhere to be found. She'd left Ellie seemingly unable to endure the grief of watching someone she loves losing herself the way Ellie was losing herself. I think this little detail adds depth to just how much this revenge quest is costing Ellie. Dina's been Ellie's partner since the beginning. She's stuck by Ellie through her worst. Yet Ellie's inability to see Abby as anything other than a villain still overpowers the joy and love that she has for Dina and their son, JJ. And in the end, Ellie was left with nothing. Now, another female character that comes to mind for me personally whose story is driven by love is Sadie Adler and Abigail Marston from Red Dead Redemption 2. Sadie is similar to Ellie in a way that she was living a happy life with her husband until it was ripped away from her when violent gang members murdered her husband. She too, like Ellie, lost herself in her quest for revenge, although Sadie was much more aware of what she's becoming than Ellie was. It's also worth noting that other characters in Red Dead Redemption 2 underestimated her strength. Initially, Sadie was put in kitchen duty until she proved to everyone that she's probably the most fearless out of all of them. She's not out for glory or independence. She's absolutely vicious, and what drives her is both love and grief. It's a tragic form of love, but it's love nonetheless, and it's what makes Sadie so compelling as a character, even though she's a side character. Now, Abigail is a bit different. She's not good at fighting the way Sadie is, but her strength comes from a different place. When the father of her child, John Marston, abandoned her and their son, she didn't collapse or became helpless. She stood on her own and raised their son by herself during that time. And when John does come back, Abigail cared for him because she still loved him, but she didn't immediately throw herself at him. And in the epilogue, when Abigail realized that John wasn't willing to shift away from his habits and putting himself in gunfights to make a living, she actually left him. Not because she didn't love him, but because she knew she couldn't withstand seeing the man she loves make the same mistakes as other outlaws. She was strong enough to walk away when she realized John wasn't capable of giving her the life that she deserved. And that requires immense strength, especially when Abigail has been with John for over a decade at that point. She only came back when John actually had something to show, when he had worked his ass off to get rid of his old habits and was able to give Abigail the peaceful life that she wanted and deserved. To me, characters like Abigail show how a story about romance doesn't make a female character weak. If anything, it makes me realize how strong they are. It's not a showcase of brute physical strength, but Abigail being able to walk away from a love that she knows wasn't right for her is a kind of strength that's actually a lot more rare and also a lot more real. She's not willing to settle, and I love how Red Dead Redemption 2 showed that John wasn't this villain or that he's lesser because he's a man. John was incredibly flawed in his own way and failed in becoming the partner that Abigail knew she deserved. That is until he made core changes in his life. Not just surface level ones though. It required him to walk away from the outlaw lifestyle that he's been a part of since he was a boy. In a way, this was also part of his redemption story. And even then, it's not enough because if you get to the first Red Dead Redemption game, then you'd know how this love story ends. But the point I'm trying to make here is that when romance is done right and with intention, it doesn't take away from female characters. Instead, romance can add depth and enrich these characters' stories. So my conclusion. Where are we right now? I think we're at a crossroads. We already have a list of amazing female characters in video games, and the ones that work are always the ones that are written with intention and not with the desire to cater to an audience. I also still firmly believe that characters of all genders should be allowed to be attractive because it usually just results in a more enjoyable experience for everyone. I also hope that developers won't be scared to write messy and compelling female characters. The most relatable characters are usually the most flawed and complex. It's really hard to relate or feel connected to a character if they're not allowed to show any form of emotions or if they're not allowed to make mistakes. Writing flawed characters doesn't automatically mean that we're portraying them as lesser or bad. If anything, it's what makes them human. I just hope that developers can continue to understand the balance between writing a character with intention and also making them appealing in design, and also how those two things are not mutually exclusive. Like everything else, I do believe that it's all about intention and balance. So that's all I really have to say. I know this video is a bit different than my usual Genshin rants, but I wanted to rant about this because there's so many amazing female characters in video games, and I hope that we'll get more messy, human, and compelling ones in the future. What are your favorite female characters in video games? Let me know in the comments, and if you made it this far, please consider subscribing. It helps me out a lot. If not, that's fine as well. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.